Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I used to believe that marriage was built on trust, that if you gave enough, supported enough, sacrificed enough, the other person would do the same. That's what I thought Jessica and I had. Something real, something worth fighting for. But I was wrong. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. The signs were there, subtle at first. The way she spoke to me had changed over time, like she had grown tired of pretending to care. The small gestures of affection became obligations. The inside jokes we once had became moments she rolled her eyes at. The distance wasn't sudden, it was slow, calculated. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Jessica had always been the social one, the one who made friends easily, who could hold a conversation with anyone in the room while I was content sitting back, observing. I had never needed to be the center of attention. I figured maybe she just needed to let off steam, that the occasional sharp comment or sarcastic remark was her way of venting stress. But it never stopped. It started with the small things. A sigh when I told a story, an eye roll when I mentioned something from work. She'd interrupt me mid-sentence, sometimes not even realizing she was doing it, like what I had to say wasn't worth the air it took to say it. Then it got worse. We'd be out with friends, and she'd cut me down in front of them. "You wouldn't believe how dramatic Ryan can be," she'd say with a laugh, sipping her wine. "If I come home 10 minutes late, he acts like I've been gone for a week." They'd laugh. I'd force a smile. "You should see him trying to plan a vacation." She'd continue, nudging Lisa. "He's the kind of guy who packs emergency supplies for a weekend trip to the beach." Another round of laughter. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation. I'd sit there, gripping my beer, pretending it didn't sting, pretending it didn't chip away at me. But it did. It wasn't about the jokes. It was about how easily they came, about the way she wanted everyone to see me as something less capable, less interesting, less a man. The breaking point came at a dinner party, one of those nights where I felt more like an accessory than a husband. I had been quiet most of the evening, sipping my drink, letting Jessica soak up the attention she always seemed to crave. I stepped into the kitchen to grab another beer, but I stopped just before rounding the corner when I heard my name. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm babysitting, Jessica was saying, her voice laced with amusement. Lisa let out a small laugh. "Oh, come on, he's not that bad." Jessica scoffed. "I love him, but let's be real, he's just so rigid. You know how military guys are. They think because they serve, they have life all figured out, but honestly, Ryan is kind of clueless when it comes to the real world." Something in Lisa's voice shifted. "I mean, he seems like a great guy." Jessica sighed dramatically. "Oh, he is," she said, dragging out the words. "Just not the kind of guy you build a future with." I felt the words like a punch to the gut. Not the kind of guy you build a future with. I had spent years building a life for us. I had given up nights, weekends, put in the work to make sure she never had to stress about bills, about security, about anything. And this was what she thought of me. I set my drink down and walked out. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't call her out in front of everyone. I just left. And for the first time in years, I stopped making excuses for her. I started paying attention. And that's when I realized Jessica had already checked out of our marriage. She just hadn't told me yet. I didn't sleep well that night. After leaving the dinner party, I drove around for hours, replaying Jessica's words in my head. Not the kind of guy you build a future with. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't some offhand comment she made without thinking. It was the truth, her truth. She had said it without hesitation, without a second thought about how it might sound. And Lisa hadn't even been surprised. That was what hit the hardest. How many times had Jessica said things like that when I wasn't around? How many of our friends had nodded along while she turned me into some kind of joke? By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, Jessica was already home. I could see the light from the living room through the front window. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what I was going to say to her. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that talking wasn't going to change anything. Jessica had already made up her mind about me a long time ago. I stepped inside and found her curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a half-empty glass of wine resting on the coffee table. She didn't even look up. Where'd you go? She asked, her tone casual, like I had just stepped out for a smoke instead of walking out on her humiliation parade. Needed some air, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She finally glanced at me, arching an eyebrow. You're being weird. I let out a short breath, shaking my head. You really don't get it, do you? She frowned, setting her phone down. Get what? I stared at her, wondering if she was really this clueless or if she was just pretending. The way you talk about me. The way you make me out to be some kind of idiot in front of our friends. You think I don't notice? She rolled her eyes. Oh God, Ryan. Don't start. It was just a joke. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't just a joke. I heard what you said to Lisa. That made her pause. I saw it in her face, the split second of panic before she masked it with annoyance. And? She said, folding her arms. What? Are you mad because I vented to my best friend? Because I told her how I actually feel sometimes? I let out a bitter laugh. No, Jessica. I'm mad because you made it pretty damn clear that you don't respect me. That you see me as a burden instead of a husband. She scoffed. Oh, come on. You're overreacting. Am I? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If I sat around with my buddies and told them that you weren't the kind of woman I wanted a future with, would that be overreacting? Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have a quick response. Instead, she grabbed her wine glass and took a slow sip like she needed to buy herself a few extra seconds. You're twisting this, she finally said. I didn't say I didn't want a future with you. I just meant you don't get me sometimes. You're so rigid. Everything has to be planned out. Everything has to be structured. It's exhausting. I exhaled through my nose. So because I'm responsible? Because I don't just coast through life expecting someone else to handle things? She groaned, rubbing her temples. I don't want to do this right now. Of course she didn't. Because that was how it always went. She could dish out all day long, but the second I stood up for myself, suddenly I was the problem. I turned away, heading for the stairs. Ryan, she called after me, her tone softer now. Come on, don't be like this. I stopped on the first step. Like what? Like a child, she muttered. Sulking. I gritted my teeth. I'm done talking. Of course you are, she said under her breath, picking up her phone again. You always shut down when things don't go your way. I didn't reply. I just went upstairs, shutting the door behind me. But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Jessica laughing at something on her phone. Just hours ago, she had humiliated me in front of our friends, dismissed my feelings like they didn't matter, and now she was perfectly fine. Because she didn't care. Not about me. Not about how I felt. Not about what she had done to our marriage. And as I lay there, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Jessica had spent years chipping away at me, acting like I was nothing, making me feel small. But I wasn't small, and I was done being her joke. I woke up the next morning feeling like something inside me had shifted. The weight of Jessica's words from the night before hadn't disappeared, but it felt different now. Less like an open wound and more like a scar that was finally toughening up. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was aware. Jessica moved through the house like nothing had happened, humming as she made coffee, scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table. I watched her for a moment, the way she looked so completely unbothered, as if she hadn't spent the past few years turning me into a joke. I sat down across from her, picking up my mug. You have plans today? She barely looked up. Girls' night at Lisa's. I raised an eyebrow. Again? She finally met my gaze, and there it was, the briefest flicker of something defensive before she masked it with a shrug. Yeah, we're just catching up, maybe watching a movie. I leaned back in my chair. You never come home with stories from these nights. Jessica sighed, setting her phone down. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said evenly, that every time you spend the night at Lisa's, you come home acting like nothing happened. No funny stories, no complaining about what she made for dinner, nothing. It's weird. She scoffed. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't give you a detailed report on my night. I didn't realize I had to check in like a child. There it was. The deflection. The subtle way she twisted things to make me the unreasonable one. I smiled faintly. Just an observation. She rolled her eyes. You need a hobby. I let that one go. Because I already had one now. Watching her. Jessica left later that evening, giving me a half-hearted wave before heading out the door. I waited exactly 5 minutes before grabbing my keys. Lisa's house was only 15 minutes away, but I took my time getting there, parking down the street far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed. Lisa and Brandon lived in one of those quiet cookie-cutter neighborhoods, the kind where everyone had the same lawn furniture and the houses all had matching mailboxes. It was easy to blend in, easy to sit in my truck and watch. Jessica's car was already parked in the driveway. The lights inside the house glowed warmly, but I wasn't looking at the main house. I was looking at the home office above the garage. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, watching, waiting. If she really was having a girls' night, then she'd be inside with Lisa. But something told me that wasn't the case. I was right. At exactly 10:47 p.m., I saw movement in the office window. The faint silhouette of a woman. Then, a few seconds later, the unmistakable shadow of a man. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Brandon, Lisa's husband. I had suspected it, but seeing it confirmed was something else entirely. Jessica wasn't just sneaking off. She wasn't just lying. She was betraying Lisa in the worst way possible, right under her nose, in her own home, and she thought she was going to get away with it. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to storm in there, wasn't going to start yelling. That wasn't my style. Jessica thought she was smart, thought she had it all figured out. She had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Lisa. Hey, I need to talk to you about something important. But first, do me a favor. Put a baby monitor in your home office. Just trust me. She responded with a confused emoji. Then, a minute later, why? I stared at the glowing office window. Because I think you're about to find out something you need to know. Lisa didn't respond right away, and I didn't blame her. Telling someone to put a baby monitor in their own home office was a weird request, especially without an explanation. But I knew Lisa. She wasn't the type to ignore her gut when something felt off. 15 minutes passed before I finally saw her reply. Ryan, what the hell is this about? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. Telling her outright over text felt wrong. She needed to see it for herself. Just trust me. Do it before the next girls' night. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. She was typing, hesitating, trying to decide if she should push for more information. Then finally, fine. But this better not be some kind of stupid prank. It's not. I put my phone down, my heart still pounding. This was happening. The pieces were falling into place. And if Jessica was as careless as I thought she was, she'd walk right into her own destruction. I spent the next 2 weeks waiting, watching. Jessica went about her days as if nothing had changed, slipping into her usual routine of barely acknowledging me when she was home. She still took long showers, still smirked at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, still had girls' nights circled on the calendar like it was some sacred tradition. The night before she left, I played my part perfectly. Anything fun planned? I asked over dinner, acting as if I had already forgotten our last conversation about it. Jessica barely looked up from her plate. Same as always. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Tell Lisa I said hi. That got her attention. A flicker of something crossed her face, but she recovered quickly, sipping her wine like nothing was off. The next evening, she left with a casual kiss on the cheek, a murmured, "Love you," that sounded more like an obligation than anything real. I watched from the window as her taillights disappeared down the street. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat. Lisa had already messaged me. Baby monitor is set up. Now tell me what the hell is going on. I exhaled. You'll hear it soon enough. She didn't respond, but she didn't have to, because the moment Jessica walked into that office, everything she thought was hidden was about to be exposed. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, waiting. Minutes ticked by, then an hour. I imagined Lisa lying in bed, oblivious to what was happening just down the hall. The office, the one she probably walked past 100 times without thinking, was about to become the place where her entire world fell apart. Then my phone buzzed. Lisa's name flashed across the screen. I answered. At first, there was only breathing. Heavy, ragged. Then sharp inhale like someone choking back a sob. Ryan, she whispered. Tell me I'm not hearing what I think I'm hearing. I closed my eyes. I am sorry, Lisa. A muffled noise, maybe a gasp, maybe the rustling of sheets as she sat up in bed. Then suddenly, anger. Pure, shanking ganja. That bastard. I heard movement, the distinct creak of a mattress, the sound of hurried footsteps, then the unmistakable sound of a door swinging open. What the hell is going on in here? Lisa wasn't whispering anymore. Then came the chaos, a scramble of movement. Jessica's voice, stammering, trying to come up with an excuse. Lisa, oh my God, I can explain, you can explain? Lisa's voice cracked with rage. You're in my house, with my husband, while I'm sleeping upstairs. Brandon's voice cut in, a low, desperate mumble of excuses. Lisa, please, let's just shut up, she screamed. Jessica tried again. Lisa, please get out. Silence. I could almost picture the moment. Lisa standing in the doorway, her face flushed with fury, her hands shaking. Jessica frozen, her mouth open, scrambling for an excuse that didn't exist. Lisa's voice came back, lower this time, filled with venom. I swear to God, if you don't walk out of this house right now, I will make sure every single person we know hears what I just heard. Jessica inhaled sharply, and for a second, there was nothing but tense, suffocating silence. Then, the hurried shuffle of movement. Footsteps, the rustling of fabric, a door opening, then a final, whispered, broken Lisa, and then the door slammed shut. I let out a slow breath. Lisa was still breathing heavily on the other end of the line, but she didn't say anything. Finally, I spoke. I'll send the audio to everyone else. A pause. Then, darkly, do it. I hung up. Then, with the push of a button, I sent the recording to every single person in our mutual friend group. Jessica wanted to play games. She just never thought she'd lose everything. The moment I hit send, I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. Jessica had spent months, maybe longer, lying to me, sneaking around, laughing behind my back while I stayed loyal. Now, everyone would know exactly who she was. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages started rolling in. First, confused responses. Ryan, what the hell is this? Is this real? Then, as people listened, the tone changed. Oh my God. Holy crap. Jessica did this? I can't believe it. She always acted like you were the problem. And finally, my favorite. What a disgusting piece of trash. She's done. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The damage was already spreading, sinking in, turning Jessica from the woman who always had a sharp remark ready to the one nobody would ever trust again. A part of me had expected to feel some sense of regret, some flicker of hesitation. But there was nothing, just a deep, steady satisfaction. Then my phone rang. Jessica. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. By the fourth call, I finally answered, putting the phone on speaker and setting it down on the table. Ryan, she gasped, her voice panicked raw. What did you do? I picked up my beer, taking a slow sip. I made sure everyone knew the truth. Her breath hitched. You sent that to everyone? Yep. I shocked Sobi. Why? Why would you do this to me? I almost laughed. To you? I shook my head. Jessica, I didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourself. Ryan, please, she begged, her voice cracking. I messed up, okay? I know I did. But you didn't have to ruin my life. I tilted my head. That's funny. Because you didn't seem to care when you were sneaking around behind my back, humiliating me in front of all our friends. She sniffled. I didn't mean to hurt you. I let out a breath, my grip tightening around my beer bottle. No, Jessica. You just didn't think you'd get caught. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, I don't know what to do. Not my problem, I said, standing up. You should probably start with finding somewhere else to sleep tonight. Her breath hitched. Ryan, I ended the call. I wasn't about to let her turn this into some dramatic sob story where she was the victim. Not this time. 15 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even looked. Jessica stood on the porch, her face streaked with tears, her makeup smudged, looking like a woman whose world had just burned down around her. Ryan, she said, voice trembling. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Didn't take long for Lisa to kick you out, huh? Her jaw clenched, and for a second, the old Jessica flared up, the one who always had something sharp to say, the one who thought she was smarter than everyone else. But then it faded, replaced with pure desperation. Can we just talk? She pleaded. Just us? Please? I studied her for a long moment, then stepped back. Fine. 5 minutes. She let out a breath of relief and stepped inside. The second the door closed, she turned to me, wringing her hands together. Ryan, I don't even know where to start. I sat down on the couch, motioning for her to continue. Try the truth. For once. She swallowed, looking down. I made a mistake. I arched an eyebrow. A mistake? I repeated. Jessica, forgetting to pay a bill is a mistake. Leaving the oven on is a mistake. You had an affair. She flinched. I know. She took a shaky breath. I was unhappy, Ryan. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you were unhappy? I gestured around the room. So your solution was to sleep with Lisa's husband? Her eyes welled up. I wasn't thinking. I got caught up in it, and You weren't thinking? I interrupted, my voice sharp now. Jessica, you lied to me for months. You planned this. You looked me in the eye and told me you loved me while you were sneaking around behind my back. She wiped at her face. I was stupid. No, I said flatly. You were selfish. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Can we fix this? I stared at her, trying to understand how she could be serious. Fix this? She nodded desperately. Please, Ryan. We have a life together. We can get past this. I can change. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Jessica, let me ask you something, I said calmly. If I hadn't caught you, would you have stopped? Her lips parted slightly. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. I let out a breath, shaking my head. That's what I thought. Ryan, please, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled back before she could touch me. I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning, I said. You can pack your things and leave tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. She let out a quiet sob. I can't believe this is happening. I stood up. Neither can I said, walking to the door and opening it. But here we are. She didn't move at first. Then, with a broken exhale, she stepped forward, pausing in the doorway. You'll regret this, she whispered. I smiled. No, Jessica. You will. I didn't hear from Jessica the next morning, which was fine by me. After I shut the door in her face, she stood there for a minute, like she expected me to open it again. Maybe she thought if she just waited long enough, I'd have second thoughts. That I'd break down and let her back in, let her spin more lies, let her crawl her way out of the mess she had made. But I didn't. Instead, I listened as she let out one last choked sob, then heard her footsteps retreat down the porch. The sound of her car, doors slamming. The roar of her engine as she sped off into the night. And just like that, she was gone. By the time I woke up, the air in the house felt different. Lighter. I had spent years walking around in my own home like I was an afterthought, like I had to tiptoe around her moods, her temper, her expectations. But now, there was nothing but silence. And for the first time, I realized how much I had missed it. I made coffee, stood by the kitchen window, and stared out at the yard, taking in the morning like it was the first one I'd seen in years. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel loss. I just felt free. Then my phone buzzed. I figured it might be Jessica, one last desperate attempt to get me to talk to her. But when I glanced at the screen, it wasn't her. It was Lisa. We need to talk. I hesitated for a moment, then typed back. Where? My place. Brandon's coming to get his things today. I don't want to be here alone. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and headed out. By the time I pulled into Lisa's driveway, I could already see the tension on her face. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as I parked. She looked exhausted. How are you holding up? I asked as I walked up the steps. She let out a humorless laugh. I just kicked my husband out of my house. How do you think I'm holding up? Fair enough. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house was in disarray, boxes stacked in the living room, half-packed bags near the door. It looked like a war zone. He's coming to get his stuff? I asked. She nodded. Yeah. I told him he had exactly 2 hours to pack whatever he could fit in his car. After that, anything left behind is going in the trash. I smirked. Brutal. She shrugged. Not brutal enough. We sat on the couch, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We had both been blindsided. Both had our lives ripped apart in the most humiliating way possible. And yet, sitting there, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a man who had lost something. If anything, I felt like I had just been handed my life back. Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. Ryan, can I ask you something? Yeah. Did you ever suspect it before? Like deep down? I thought about it. Not at first, I admitted, but the past few months, something felt off. I just didn't want to believe it. She exhaled. Same. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Lisa looked over at me, her expression unreadable. Thank you for telling me the truth. I met her gaze. You deserve to know. She nodded, then glanced at her watch. Brandon should be here soon. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. I smirked. Oh, I want to. Lisa let out a real laugh at that, shaking her head. Fine, but don't start anything. I raised a hand. Me? Start something? Never. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. An hour later, a car pulled up. Brandon stepped out, looking like a man who had spent the entire night in his own personal hell. His shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, and for once, he didn't have that smug look he always carried. Lisa didn't even give him the chance to knock. She opened the door before he reached it, arms crossed. Your time starts now. Brandon sighed. Lisa, come on. Can we at least talk? Lisa laughed coldly. You talked plenty when my back was turned. Brandon's eyes flicked to me, standing behind her. His jaw tightened. What's he doing here? I smiled. Moral support. His nostrils flared, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he brushed past Lisa and started gathering his things. We watched as he moved through the house, stuffing clothes into bags, yanking drawers open like he had some kind of right to be angry. Lisa didn't flinch. When he finally made his way back to the door, he hesitated. He looked at her, then at me, then back to her. You're really done, huh? He muttered. Lisa lifted her chin. I was done the second you chose her. His throat bobbed. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just nodded, grabbed his bags, and walked out. Lisa shut the door behind him and let out a slow breath. Then she turned to me. Let's get drunk. I grinned. Now, that is a plan. We sat on the porch with a couple of beers, watching the sun go down, letting the weight of everything settle. There was no rush, no need to figure out what came next. For now, it was enough to know we had made it through. The morning after Brandon packed up and left Lisa's house, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. There were no lingering doubts, no heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Just silence. Jessica hadn't called or texted since she left. Part of me expected her to, but she knew as well as I did that there was no coming back from this. The damage was permanent, and for once, she had to live with the consequences of her actions instead of shifting the blame onto me. I had a meeting with my lawyer that afternoon. I didn't want to drag this divorce out any longer than necessary. Jessica and I didn't have kids, and we both made our own money, so there was no reason to make things complicated. I wanted a clean break. Rachel, my lawyer, was a no-nonsense type of woman. She flipped through the paperwork, nodding approvingly at the evidence I had collected. This is airtight, she said, adjusting her glasses. With this, we can file for an uncontested divorce. She won't have any leverage to ask for alimony or assets. Good, I said, leaning back in my chair. I don't want anything from her. I just want out. Rachel tapped a pen against the folder. She might still try to fight it. Some people just don't know when they've lost. I smirked. Oh, she knows. Rachel studied me for a moment, then nodded. I'll get everything filed. She'll be served within the week. I left her office feeling lighter. It was all falling into place now. The life I had built with Jessica was gone, but instead of feeling like I had lost something, I felt like I had escaped. I had spent years convincing myself that what we had was worth fighting for, but the truth was I had been fighting alone. That evening, I got a text from Lisa. Want to grab a drink? I hesitated for a second before replying. Yeah, meet you at Murphy's? See you in 20. Murphy's was an old dive bar just outside of town, the kind of place where the beer was cold, the music was low, and no one cared who you were or what baggage you brought in with you. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, nursing a whiskey on the rocks. She looked different, still tired, still carrying the weight of everything that had happened, but there was something else in her expression now. Freedom. I sat down across from her, signaling the bartender for a beer. How are you holding up? She took a sip of her drink, swirling the ice in her glass. I should be a mess, she admitted. I mean, I spent the past few years building a life with someone who turned out to be a complete fraud. I should be angry. I should be crying my eyes out. I raised an eyebrow. And? She smirked. And? I feel great. I chuckled. Yeah, me too. She tilted her head, studying me. Is that normal? Shouldn't we be grieving or something? I thought about it for a second, then shrugged. I think we grieved a long time ago, Lisa. We just didn't know it. She exhaled, nodding. Yeah, that makes sense. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us sipping our drinks, letting the weight of everything that had happened settle between us. Then Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face twisting in disgust. Brandon. I leaned back. He seriously has the nerve to text you? She rolled her eyes. He says he wants to talk, that he made a mistake. I let out a laugh. Let me guess. Jessica isn't as fun now that she doesn't have a husband to lie to? Lisa snorted. Probably. He's like a stray dog, kicked out of one house, sniffing around for scraps at another. I raised my beer. To knowing our worth. She clinked her glass against mine. To knowing our worth. We stayed at Murphy's for a while, just talking, laughing, trading stories about our exes. It was the first time in weeks that I felt genuinely relaxed. I wasn't just moving on. I was stepping into a life where I didn't have to second-guess everything, where I didn't have to brace myself for the next betrayal. By the time we left, I realized something. I wasn't just free of Jessica. I was finally free of the man she had turned me into, the man who let himself be walked on, the man who thought love meant sacrificing his own self-respect. And I was never going back. The morning after Murphy's, I woke up to something unfamiliar, clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't waiting for the next argument, the next sarcastic jab, the next moment where Jessica made me feel like I was less. The house was quiet, but it wasn't an empty kind of quiet. It was peaceful. Mine. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers Rachel had emailed me. The official filing had gone through, and Jessica had been served. Part of me wondered how she had reacted when she saw the paperwork, if she had crumpled it in anger, cried, or just sat there in shock. I didn't care. Jessica had burned every bridge. There was nothing left to salvage, no reason to even acknowledge her existence outside of signing a few more documents and making sure she didn't try to pull anything in the divorce. I checked my phone. A handful of texts from mutual friends, some shocked, some taking my side, others trying to stay neutral. A few from people who clearly didn't know the full story, sending me half-hearted, hope you and Jessica can work things out messages. I ignored those. Then one message stood out. Lisa, he's still trying. I sighed, already knowing what she meant before I even replied. Me? Brandon? Lisa, yeah. Called twice. Left a voicemail this time. Me. Let me guess, he's sorry? Lisa, so sorry. Biggest mistake of his life. Wants to at least talk. Me. Typical. Lisa, what do you think he'd do if I told him to come over and talk just to slam the door in his face? I smirked, taking a sip of coffee. Me. Film it. That'd be worth watching. Lisa. Tempting. I sat back, shaking my head. Brandon was predictable. Just like Jessica, they both thought they could betray the people who loved them, throw everything away for a cheap thrill, and then, when reality hit, come crawling back as if their actions could be undone with a few apologies. Lisa wasn't having it, and neither was I. I spent the rest of the day doing something I hadn't done in years, making plans for myself. I went down to the local hardware store, picked up supplies to start renovating the guest room into an actual office, something I had wanted to do for ages, but never got around to because Jessica always had some other demand. I went to the gym, not because I needed to burn off anger, but because I finally had the time and energy to take care of myself again. I was starting over, and it felt damn good. Later that evening, I was finishing up in the garage when I got another text from Lisa. Lisa, I told him no, blocked his number. Feels good. I smiled, wiping my hands on a rag. Me, proud of you. Lisa, right back at you. I stared at my phone for a second before typing again. Me, you up for dinner this weekend? Nothing serious. Just two people who went through hell and deserve a good steak. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, Lisa, That actually sounds really nice. I felt something shift then. Not in a dramatic, life-altering way, but in a quiet, steady way. Like turning the page on a book you didn't realize had reached a new chapter. Jessica and Brandon had their chance, and they blew it. Now, they had to live with the wreckage they created. Lisa and I, we were finally building something new. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.